Okay, let's start the class. So today we will look in detail about shrinkage and creep and what are the ways to address those shrinkage and creep issues. Right? So you're all familiar with what is shrinkage and what is creep, right? Chandana? So I'll make two teams. So from this roll number 26 to 31, Chandana and Devi Satvika, Dravatu, Dheeraj, Reddy, Dinesh Kumar, Dilraj. So you please discuss the points that you know regarding shrinkage. So you're all there in class?
Yes, ma'am.
Fine. The second theme is Divyanshu, Elamuhil, right? Did I pronounce it correctly? And Virendra Swami, Ganesh Aravind, Ganta Bhuvaneshwari, Gokul. So the team one can start discussing about the facts that you know regarding shrinkage. So what is shrinkage? Channa, are you there?
Movement of water in paste volume, creep.
I'll come to the creep part, okay? So I'm just talking about shrinkage now. So yeah,
It's like when the water content is less in the concrete, like after the hardened state, it will like shrink. So there'll be cracks and all.
all right. Yeah. So what are the different types of shrinkage? So you said, when water is lost. Can you please repeat your response again?
Like when the water content is less in concrete, after the hardened state, the concrete will shrink, like it will come closer and we can experience cracks in that part.
Okay. Not exactly. It doesn't depend on the water content of your concrete. So water content depends on the mixed design that you are choosing. So it can be less, it can be more. But there is some process that is happening which will lead to moisture loss from your concrete to the outside environment. So when the concrete tries to escape from your, when the moisture tries to escape from your concrete, that time because of the movement and especially once your concrete has hardened, you know, So you observe such type of shrinking. So your concrete tries to shrink because of this moisture movement to the outside environment, but your hardened concrete will not allow such shrink, and that will lead to cracking. Is that clear?
Okay, ma'am.
Fine. So what are the different types of shrinkage that you can observe? So this, I'll see, Okay. So did you know the type of shrinkage? See, I'm counting this in detail because half of the students are from B section. I remember what are the portions that I covered in concrete technology, and remaining students are from A section, and I do not know whether these things are covered in detail in your concrete technology portion or not. So that is why I'm going in detail to discuss about those issues, right? So what are the types of shrinkage that you know? You know that now you know what is shrinkage, and depending on the stages of your concrete, especially as it matures over the duration, so different types of reaction occurs and which could lead to shrinkage. So based on those mechanisms, we classify the shrinkage into different categories. So what are those types?
Yes, ma'am. We have
Plastic shrinkage.
plastic shrinkage, yeah, drying shrinkage, thermal shrinkage.
Yeah, temperature shrinkage.
Thermal, drying,
Thermal,
Temperature.
that is
thermal
thermal.
and temperature are same, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Carbonation shrinkage.
Carbonation shrinkage.
I remember these, ma'am.
Chemical shrinkage.
Chemical shrinkage. So at what age this shrinkage will take place?
Like plastic shrinkage happens in the plastic stage of the concrete, and
Okay.
like drying shrinkage in the hardened state.
Mhm.
Thermal shrinkage when there are temperature differences while placing the concrete.
Okay. So the first thing is like plastic shrinkage when your concrete is relatively the age of 3 or 7 days old, and as it ages, other reactions will take place. So when do you expect your concrete to experience drying shrinkage?
In the hardened state after some hours, like when it is in the state of hardening.
Okay, but in practical, we observe such type of drying shrinkage after several years. So the drying shrinkage will not be evident at the initial stage. So it takes time for really induce the cracking in the concrete. So it takes several years to occur, and thermal variation depending on the temperature variation within the concrete system that occurs. So this could be in days or months depending on the thermal variation condition. And carbonation shrinkage, again this takes time because you need to have this quantity of accumulation of carbon dioxide to cause the required reaction which will lead to shrinkage. And chemical shrinkage, again this is in the initial stage of your concrete, right? So can you tell the examples of where do you expect such type of shrinkage, the common application which are sensitive for these type of issues? So not all the structures or all the applications are sensitive for such shrinkage issues, but there are typical applications that we can consider and say those are sensitive for shrinkage issues, and we need to address those things while we in the designing process or while we select the material for its construction. In some cases, we observe shrinkage over the time and we fix the problem after it has occurred. So what was done already, and you will be fixing it. And in certain situations, you anticipate that the structure would experience this issue, and you take precautions while you design itself. So can you tell any such examples like that for this shrinkage issue? Think of the scenarios, the structures which could experience these things. So I have told the types, right? So based on the types, you just think of, what type of structures would experience such type of shrinkage issues. Dheeraj? Dinesh?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Can you tell any example for this issue?
Examples means like this kind of shrinkages causes like curves over the menisci kind of form. So to reduce that, we are using shrinkage reducing admixtures to it, ma'am.
Yeah, exactly. So those are like to fix the issue. So when you
Yes,
anticipate the shrinkage, so you can add some shrinkage reducing admixtures in your concrete, which would help you to reduce the surface tension, which
yes,
will result in tensile stress, right? Because your tensile stress is the enemy for your concrete. Your concrete is not designed, or it is not made for taking tension, you know.
yes, ma'am.
So
It's made for
yeah, so there is a way to address this issue. I'm just asking some examples, which would experience such type of shrinkage problems.
like problems caused by that, no?
Now, where can you observe such type of shrinkage issues in real time constructions or structure?
In real time.
So technically, theoretically, we know what is shrinkage, and you have told a way to address that also. But where can you use such type of admixtures? If you know that some particular structure is going to experience such type of shrinkage issue, then you can use these type of admixtures in the concrete while you construct the structure itself, instead of waiting till the structure to get damaged and then rectifying it.
Yeah, but yeah, we can. I think you can. I'll think it.
Fine. Dilraj? Okay, so I'll just put this in a way. Devi Satvika told like shrinkage is occurring because of moisture lost from the concrete to the environment, right? So now you know the problem that because of this moisture loss, and when especially when once your concrete has hardened, and even in the fresh stage itself, which would result in plastic shrinkage. So what is happening? There is a moisture loss, and if that moisture loss becomes significant, then you will observe, significant shrinkage issues, like a lot of cracks on the surface. So here, the point to note is that this is happening on the surface of the structure when that is exposed to environment, right? So in such cases, you are dealing with when you are dealing with large surface area structure, and when the large surface area is exposed to environmental condition, you will experience such type of issues. Now can you tell what are the type of structure that you can think of which has large surface area exposed to outside environment? Any structure that you think of which has large surface area exposed to environment? What is the first thing that you get?
Bridges.
Bridges. Good. So even the buildings that you reside, so the outside, especially when it is like G+1 or 2, and when you have high story buildings and all, so huge surface area is exposed to environment, so you might have noticed some kind of cracks on the surfaces, especially on the terrace and the parapets of your buildings. So have you noticed such cracks?
Yes, ma'am.
So those are
Yes,
like
ma'am.
shrinkage cracks, so when it is exposed for longer durations, that will lead to drying shrinkage. And then the type of shrinkage that would be, so that depends on the locality. If it is like, especially bridges, if you consider that there is a lot of possibility that bridges could be exposed to CO2 conditions. So that may experience both drying shrinkage and then carbonation as well. Fine. So these are like basic things that you have to recollect when we talk about shrinkage. And now let's move to, okay, I'll ask one more question, that what type of deformation that shrinkage would cause? Will it be a permanent deformation or elastic deformation?
It's mostly a plastic, and certainly we are using admixtures so that it can be rectified.
So mostly these are inelastic deformation, right? So this will cause some, even though you rectify, you cannot rectify it completely, as in your structure in elastic state. If it is causing elastic deformation, by rectifying it, you can get back, you can get back the performance to the normal case. But when you have inelastic deformation, even though if you rectify, you can fix the problem to certain limit, but it will not be, fixed 100%. So you cannot get back to the original condition. There will be some amount of deformation left over it, but the level of deformation can be controlled by rectifying it. So now let's move to the creep part. Yeah, Bhuvneshwari, now you can share your comments with me.
Yeah, it is a structural deformation under sustained load, and these loads last for a longer duration.
Yeah, under sustained load, this load lasts for longer duration. Again, this is going to induce inelastic deformation, right? So what is the difference between shrinkage and creep?
Ma'am, creep it depends on long-term pressure.
Creep depends on
Increases
long term.
deflection as time passes.
Yeah, increases deflection as time passes. But what is happening? So, there is one common thing between shrinkage and creep, and one difference, between shrinkage and creep. So, what is it?
Like
Both is related with
shrinkage
Loss
does.
of moisture.
So shrinkage has loss of moisture to the outside condition or within the system itself, whereas creep, the water will be lost under creep or not. What will happen when your concrete is subjected to sustained load for longer duration? So basically, when you have something, some load acting on a particular region of your concrete, so the water inside, so water in the sense, even in the hardened concrete, you will have some bound water or absorbed water inside your microstructure, right? So that will be compressed, or there will be some movement between the pores. So because of the movement of water, you start observing deformation due to creep under sustained load. So you're right, creep will occur due to sustained load, but the mechanism behind that is when you have sustained load, that is going to cause water movement inside your concrete. So in the hardened concrete, water cannot move freely. So because of that, that is going to induce some stress and that will cause deformation.
And if this deformation is permanent, we call it as a creep failure.
Sorry?
Creep failure. And if this deformation is permanent one,
Typically, like the creep deformations are permanent and you can recover to the certain level. Again, it is similar to shrinkage, right? Because you have water movement inside your microstructure level. So where you have fine pores. So in such cases, when the water tries to move, when it tries to push things, so that is going to induce permanent deformation there inside your matrix. You can recover when you remove the load, but it will not be 100% recovery. So where do you expect such type of creep issues?
We can see in newly constructed bridges, no?
Newly constructed bridges.
Yeah. Or dams.
bridges.
Dams? How in dams?
Maybe by deep.
Yeah, you're right. That could be. Then other thing, other application.
Bridges.
Mhm. So why is it in newly constructed bridges? What happens in the bridges which stays for longer duration? Old bridges.
Because of thermal stresses.
So you said sustained loading for long period, right? So in
Yes,
general,
ma'am.
the structure which is subjected to loading for longer duration. So bridge structure is one of the construction that you can see that is expected to stay for longer duration and constantly with service condition. So that will be subjected to sustained loading environment. Another thing is pre-stressed concrete, where you have stress at the initial stage itself before it gets into service condition. Right? These are like common applications in which you can expect such type of issues and you can take precautions while you do construct the structure itself. So any more point to add? All right. So with that, we'll just get into,
Hello, ma'am.
yeah.
In group 6, we can prevent creeps by using alloy and proper designs, ma'am.
Alloy and proper designs. Can you please explain that?
By proper mixture of concrete and cement, we can prevent like permanent creep and mm,
So by choosing proper mix design, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So
But,
you're right, but can you be a little more specific to, in what way we have to design to get the proper?
the creep factor is of like three factors are there, ma'am. Aggregate mixture and mixed proportion and aggregate and concrete edges, ma'am.
Yeah.
By edges means through the load creep will form creep will form by load from long edges, ma'am. By mix it will be low elasticity. We can prevent that easily, but mix proportion is we want to prevent this very early, ma'am.
Okay, so your point here is like if you proportionate the aggregates and cement properly in the concrete, then that will help us to reduce such type of issue, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
mainly the point to note here is that if you have more aggregate content, that will be providing better dimension and stability, and if you reduce the cement paste, because the thing that is going to get deformed under creep and shrinkage is that cement paste. So the water molecules that is there inside the pores when that once your cement has hydrated, so that is the thing which is going to
Yeah, ma'am.
undergo deformation. So in such a way, when you have more aggregates and less cement paste, so you will obtain a better or mixed proportioning for withstanding such type of issues. Yeah, you are right.
Thank
Yeah, fine. Thank you. So now let's get into the technical part of it. Yeah, so this is a general definitions that you can go through, like what is creep, shrinkage, and creeps. So the shrinkage strain occurs when water is lost to the environmental condition, and creep strain occurs when water is forced to move within the concrete under sustained load. So both both type of issues are not completely recoverable when the concrete is resaturated, whereas in the case of shrinkage, when you expect the moisture to get lost to the environment, whereas when you consider the creep, it is related to the sustained loading. So when you remove the loading, it will not get completely recovered. So this basically indicates the deformation level due to shrinkage and creep. So this in x-axis you can see over the duration and with subjected to loading and drying case, how strain could develop on the concrete surface. So you can see the magnitude of axial strain that you can expect in your concrete ranges from 200 to the maximum of about 800 microstrain. So when you experience, when the strain goes beyond 200 microstrain or 300 microstrain, so that is going to induce significant tensile stress in your concrete. So that will lead to deformation. So this basically indicates your deformation level. And then once you remove the loading conditions, or when you wet the concrete surface to get the moisture back to your concrete, you are observing certain type of recovery there. So that is called elastic recovery. So only the elastic part of thing will get recovered, and the remaining deformation will stay as such. So that is why this is not completely brought down. So when you observe strain reduction, that basically indicates elastic recovery, and then the remaining portion is what we call it as inelastic deformation, called permanent deformation. Similarly, when you remove the creep, loading case, you will observe some amount of creep recovery, and finally you have this much strain left on the concrete surface as permanent deformation. So where do you expect such type of issues, or like mainly the surface which has large surface area and exposed to environment? One is pavements and slab on grades, and you can have bridge columns and piers, and most often this shrinkage and creep go hand in hand, and you experience both issues together. So the combined effects that you can see here is like one example is pavements and slab on grades. And then when you talk about axial strain, that is mainly on the columns of your bridge piers. And then this will result in increased deflection. So the beams and girders, when it is subjected to so those are like flexural members. So when you consider the bridge structures, you will have the flexural members in the form of beams and girders, and then you have piers, column members, which is subjected to axial loading, and then pre-stressed concrete systems. So when we have pre-stressed concrete systems, the strand that you use, so that will be under stressed conditions. So when there is something under stressed conditions, so but typically we, one second. So typically pre-stressed concrete systems are under a high stress level, and you can if you convert into loads, normally it will be subjected to 200 kilonewton, depending on the type of strands that you have. Size of these strands, this range will vary, but generally the stress level will be around 1800 MPa. And when you consider the pre-stress level, this would be around 1200 MPa. Generally, 70% of your ultimate stress will be applied as your initial pre-stress. So when this concrete member has such high stress in the initial stage itself, then it will experience sustained loading for longer duration. and that will result in shrinkage and creep issues. So these are the different types of shrinkage that was mentioned by your friends. I can look at these things in detail, and you can see the duration that takes for such reaction. So plastic shrinkage usually occurs within a few hours of your concreting, and then the thermal contraction it takes about days, and the autogeneous shrinkage it occurs in some weeks to months, because this is happening within the matrix itself when you have hydrated particles, and then again that takes some amount of water for its further hydration. So that is called self desiccation due to chemical reaction. And then drying shrinkage, it takes over the occurs over the month to years, and then finally you have carbonation shrinkage. So the effect will be in this range. So you will have significant strain issues when you have drying shrinkage, and then the carbonation shrinkage magnitude will be less. The strain due to carbonation shrinkage magnitude will be less. And you all know the potential locations for such type of shrinkage and creep cracks are indicated here. So the surfaces which are exposed to environmental conditions, the parapet walls where you have restrained thermal and drying issues that could lead to the drying and thermal shrinkage. And here you have plastic shrinkage, the cracks developed due to plastic shrinkage. And other cracks are like due to the loading conditions. The tension bending cracks. So the main point to note here is the drying shrinkage locations, and then the plastic shrinkage which could occur when the large surface area is exposed, and then the parapet walls which has this restrain the environment for thermal and drying. So these are some photos that you can see which has shrinkage issues like this. So you can see the cracks developed on the slab on grade. So what are the ways to fix this? So basically you need to have a denser matrix, and you need to avoid moisture loss. So when you concrete with fine cement and silica fume, so when you have high fine cement particles, that may lead to shrinkage issues. So the surface water gets evaporate. So sometimes if you have bleed water, so the bleed water finds it difficult to move up. So that may, when something that gets stressed or difficult to move up, that will result in stress concentration at that particular location, and that leads to the formation of crack. So in the initial stage itself, you need to fix this with the help of external water. So that is why curing plays a major role. So to avoid plastic shrinkage, you need to cure your concrete properly. And this is another example which shows like concrete roofs has cracked significantly due to plastic shrinkage. So the ways to reduce plastic shrinkage is you have to reduce the rate of evaporation of water. So there are, when you deal with large constructions, there are some equipments available for reducing the rate of evaporation of water itself. How can you do that? So you can increase the temperature of your concrete, and by ensuring adequate curing. So by placing the concrete rapidly and curing it adequately. And you can provide some windshield, so which will help you to reduce the evaporation rate and keep your evaporation rate within this level. And instead of placing it in the daytime, you can place your concrete in the nighttime, especially when you have hot and humid region. So there, placing at the daytime may not be feasible, especially when you talk about this plastic shrinkage issues. So in such cases, you can do the concreting at the night, and you can use the fog system, and this will also helpful for reducing the temperature. So then another point to note is that cement content. To play with your cement content, you have to optimize your cement content in such a way that it is as less as for the required applications, because the cement paste is the one that is going to shrink and leads to this issue. So you can keep the aggregate content more, and you can play with your proportionality of your ingredients, and you can reduce the cement content. So for that, you can use shrinkage reducing admixtures, which will help you to reduce the surface tension of water. So the role of shrinkage reducing admixture is to reduce the surface tension. And thus it will reduce the tensile stress. And use of fibers. So fibers basically helps you to bridge the cracks. So crack bridging effect. So that will help you to prevent crack widening. So that your crack will not get widened and it will not get propagate. So when the crack gets wider, then that will lead to other deleterious issues also. So when you use fibers, that basically helps you to bridge the cracks and reduce the shrinkage issue. So you can see the differences between the concrete which has fibers and the concrete which doesn't have fibers. So when you use the plain concrete, especially for the pavements which has large surface area exposed to environment, you can observe such types of plastic shrinkage issue on the surface. So when you have fibers in your concrete, that will help you to arrest the cracks and reduce the cracks when it is exposed. So you can minimize your plastic shrinkage cracking when you use fibers in concrete. So now let's look at the thermal shrinkage. So thermal shrinkage occurs when there is a temperature variation in your concrete element. Especially this occurs when you have thick members and when the heat developed in your concrete is huge, especially during its hydration process. So that is very common when you talk about mass concreting where you have thick members. So in such cases, one side of the member will be subjected to higher temperature and the other side it will be subjected to relatively lower temperature compared to the side. So here you can see this basically indicates this is a embankment, or you can consider this as a retaining wall, and one side of the structure which has this backfill, and this is exposed to atmospheric condition. So this case inside your concrete element, the temperature will be high due to its hydration, and the temperature dissipates as you move away from this place, because when it is exposed, some of the temperature will be lost to the environment. So the region which is exposed to the outside environment, that will be relatively cold compared to inside. So because of this temperature variation, you will start observing cracking on the surface. Why? Because the hard side thing, so this will try to shrink, and the other side, this cold region, that will not allow your concrete to shrink, and that will lead to cracking. So the plastic concrete can expand due to heat, which tries to contract upon natural cooling later, and because of that expansion, this one is like the reasoning why the outside concrete is cold when it is exposed to the environment. This naturally the temperature gets dropped and get adjusted to the outside environmental condition, and inside you have hot region. So this one basically indicates the stage at which the temperature of thermal shrinkage can be higher. So in the initial stage, the temperature will be higher due to the hydration process, and over the time, as you move in the later stage, the temperature gets reduced. And you can see when you do the artificial cooling, you can reduce the temperature significantly. The purpose here is to note that to reduce the temperature variation inside and outside of your concrete structure, so that you can avoid the thermal cracking, which occurs due to temperature variation. Here's another example in which you can see the uneven thermal load occurring during a day. So in the afternoon time, you see the temperature at this region will be higher, or in the early morning time, the temperature will be relatively lower. So because of that, so when the temperature is higher, so the outside thing that tries to deform like this, that tries the region which is exposed to the environment, that tries to shrink, and leads to differential movement. So this points, so in some locations you will observe hinge formation like this, which is occurring due to thermal variation, and when the temperature is reduced, then your structure will get back to its normal condition. So this type of uneven thermal loads would lead to elastic deformation. So when the temperature is reduced, your structure will be healed by itself, and over the time this hinge will induce a permanent deformation. So these are called active hinges. So that keeps on changing as the temperature increases and decreases. So you can see such type of issues observed in bridge members. So this basically demonstrates you how thermal movements can induce cracking in your concrete. So when you have restrained concrete, like this newly cast restrained concrete, when the temperature increases, so that basically helps to close the crack. And when the crack is formed due to restrained drying shrinkage, so now you have a drying shrinkage issue. So the crack has occurred due to drying shrinkage. So in such cases, when the temperature is reducing, that helps you to open up the cracks further. Why? Because you observe the movement of the concrete in this portion, and here this moves in this way. So when there is a temperature increase, then both regions tries to move together, and that closes your crack. So this is the reason why you observe active hinge here. So when the temperature is increasing, yeah. So you look at it in this way. So you have a newly cast concrete, and when there is a restriction, so restrainment occurs because you have a fixed condition at the both ends, and when the concrete is drying, because of this restrainment, you observe cracking on the concrete. So this you can see exactly at the center, and this is the case for plain concrete. If you have reinforced concrete, if you have reinforced concrete, that is your RC concrete, the cracks will be distributed because your steel will help you to resist the tension better. So now we are focusing on this plain concrete. So when you have plain concrete and when that is restrained, you observe such type of cracks due to drying shrinkage. So now what happens when the temperature increases? I told when temperature increases, your concrete expands. So because of that, this crack tends to get closer. So the crack width is getting reduced. So when the temperature get decreased, then it moves in this way and it opens up the crack. And here you can see another example of such type of thermal shrinkage issues you can observe in power plants or cooling towers in power plants. So you have such a massive structure, and large surface area is exposed to sun, and depending on the position of sun, different parts of this concrete will experience different temperature variation, right? So the outside you have higher temperature, and inside, because since this is a cooling tower, inside you have, cool region. So because of that temperature variation here, typically these are designed as a circular element, but over the time you can see a change in shape. So because of the temperature variation, the circular shape is slightly changed into elliptical. And the autogeneous shrinkage, this is occurring based on the chemical reaction inside and the self-desiccation. And in this type of shrinkage, you will not observe any loss of moisture to the environment, but the concrete is getting lost within the, moisture is getting lost within the concrete system itself. So what is chemical shrinkage? So this is basically due to the hydration process, hydration between your cement and water. And then the self-desiccation means water is being removed from your capillary pores for further hydration of cement. So especially when the water cement ratio is less than 0.3, water will not be sufficient for all the cements to hydrate. So it takes some amount of water from its capillary pore for further hydration of cement. So it leads to self-desiccation issue. So this is more common problem when you have high strength concrete with less water cement ratio. So you can see here the typical range of autogeneous shrinkage strain that you can expect for concrete. At 1 month, 1 month the strain will be about 40 microstrain, and at 5 years it is about 100 microstrain. So the effect of this will be significant only at the initial stage, and over the time the effect of this is getting reduced. So this is severe when you have low water cement ratio, where you expect higher autogeneous shrinkage. So in this case, you can see when you have 0.17 water cement ratio, that would result of about 700 microstrain. So in normal concrete, the effect of this will be neglected. But if you go for high strength concrete, then you need to consider this autogeneous shrinkage, and you need to account this issue. So swelling is other thing. So we were talking about shrinkage. So shrinkage occurs when water is closed. So swelling is occurred when your concrete is subjected to water that absorbs some amount of water, and because of that absorbed water, that gets increase in its volume and mass. So this is what we call it as swelling. Okay. So swelling is due to the absorption of water by the gel, which when gel absorbs moisture, then that pushes the gel particles apart and makes them to expand. So because of this reaction, there will be a decrease in the surface tension of the gel water, and that will lead to further expansion. So because of that expansion, you can observe about 1,300 microstrains in your concrete when it is subjected to submerged curing conditions for about 100 days. So typically in concrete, the swelling will be much lower than if you have some cement mortar, because in concrete you have some amount of aggregate as well, which will not absorb the moisture compared to your cement paste, because the moisture is getting absorbed by gel hydrated products. So that is there in the cement paste. So the swelling will be significant in cement paste compared to your concrete, which is in the order of about 100 microstrains after 6 months. So here you can see drying shrinkage issue on the asphalt pavement. So basically when the moisture is lost from the capillary pores, then that will lead to collapse of your CSH structure, because your CSH structure will get compacted when the moisture is lost from its fine pores, and from the hydrated products, and that will lead to such drying shrinkage. So here is an example like when there is a restrainment to your concrete, when it is exposed to drying conditions, how the crack has occurred and leads to shrinkage. So when there is a shrinkage, you know, you will observe change in length, right? So here the first image here that indicates you have a freshly placed concrete, and the second image that is to give you an idea when there is no restriction for the movement, your concrete is basically shrinks. So here you can see the deformation of your, you have 20 feet long concrete element, and now it got reduced, the length got reduced by 0.15 inches. So this occurs when there is no restriction. But when you have restraint thing, you know, and when you have restriction, and especially for plain concretes, so the deformation somehow that has to happen, because when it is undergoing that reaction. So instead of this change in length, so you know, that tries to release its stress by inducing cracking. So the crack width will be about 0.15 inches, which would be the normal deformation that you expect. That is the change in length that you expect when you do not have any such restrainment, right? So this is the case for plain concrete, whereas when you have rebars, basically this indicates the steel rebars inside the concrete that helps to distribute the crack. So the crack distribution will be there when you have rebars. Now, if you cumulatively add these gaps, that will be about 0.15 inches. So the strain that you anticipate during the drying shrinkage would be about 600 microstrains, which results in 0.15 inch wide crack in case of plain concrete. So which is about 4 mm wide. So now I'll just, okay, I will stop it here, and this curling part we will continue in the next class.